From the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University, this is Human-Centered. Today on Human-Centered, current CASBS research affiliate Allison Stanger sits down for a chat with world-renowned philosopher and former CASBS fellow Daniel Dennett. The two discuss his time at the center from 1979 to 80 and his close working and personal relationships with other fellows. We'll hear about his journey through academia, from choosing to become a philosopher to choosing to teach at Tufts. Together they wind their way through an intellectual forest of topics: artificial intelligence and machine learning, why competency doesn't require comprehension, the controversy with Stephen Jay Gould, the power of Darwin's ideas, memes, gods, and the second best thing that CASBS gave Dennett, windsurfing.
Hi, I'm Allison Stanger, and I'm a research affiliate at Stanford University's Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, otherwise affectionately known as CASBS. My guest today is the philosopher, writer, and cognitive scientist Daniel Dennett, who is university professor and director of the Center for Cognitive Studies at Tufts University. He is also Austin B. Fletcher, professor of philosophy. Both of us are CASBS alums and external professors at the Santa Fe Institute. We're going to have a wide-ranging conversation that'll cover a whole bunch of topics. We'll explore in some detail Professor Dennett's latest book, intriguingly titled From Bacteria to Bach and Back, The Evolution of Minds. So welcome to the show, Dan.
Delighted to be here, Allison.
That's great. How is the weather today in Maine?
Right now, the weather's beautiful. We're having a little Indian summer, so it's sunny and warm. That may not last, of course, but it's very nice today.
Yes, I'm here in Vermont, where we've got the same gorgeous sunny autumn day with beautiful leaves, so it's nice to be here. I thought I would just begin by asking you a little bit about your time in 1979 to 1980 at CASBS. And I know that you were one of a 6-member AI and philosophy group during your fellowship year, and also had ongoing conversations with Hubert Dreyfus and John Searle at Berkeley, as well as Amos Tversky at Stanford. Can you tell us a little bit about your recollections of that time, and then maybe how it affected your ongoing and future work?
Yeah, that was a great year. One of my favorite years in my very adventurous academic career. John McCarthy, the man who coined the term artificial intelligence, a mathematician who held the first conference at Dartmouth, did some amazing, important early work in AI, put together a group at the center. He was at Stanford at this point, but he put together a group at CASBS, 6 of us, 2 philosophers, 3 AI researchers, and 1 psychologist, philosopher, AI researcher, Zenon Polishin. And the 6 of us spent a whole year, day after day, 5 days a week and more, talking about AI and what its implications were and what its prospects were. It was a glorious time. It had its ups and downs. It almost failed right at the beginning. When we first got out there, and the first week, we just got to know each other better. I had already known Zenon Polishin quite well. I didn't know John very well at that point. I knew John Hoagland, the philosopher from Pitt. I knew him quite well, probably knew him the best. But the others, Pat Hayes and Bob Moore, were new to me. But we spent the first 4 days introducing ourselves to each other and wrangling about some of the issues. And we thought we were getting off to a great start. And all of a sudden, John McCarthy lowered the boom on us. And he said, Okay, look. You're all smart people. I wouldn't have invited you to join the group if I didn't think you were very smart. Now stop trying to prove it to each other. If you want to go on nitpicking and finding objections and sniping at each other in this way, you just go ahead and I will return to the AI lab down the hill and let you carry on for the year. I'm not going to put up with that. Well, we weren't baby bunnies. We were fairly established scholars and researchers in our own right. But he really gave us a shot across the bows and said, look, I don't go for that kind of stuff. And then he told us some war stories, in effect, about how he'd helped solve some very hard problems, technical problems during World War II. And when another of the experts was having trouble, instead of dumping on him and finding fault, everybody chipped in to help whoever it was figure out what was wrong and solve the problem. And this idea of constructive discussion, he just lay it on us real hard. And as you can see, I've never forgotten it. It's influenced everything I've done since 1990. It really did have an immense effect on my life. Philosophers are a nitpicky type discipline, and I have learned to hate that kind of one-upmanship sniping with a passion. And it was John who first blew the whistle on it for me. But after that early warning, we settled down and things got really interesting. It was a wonderful year. I can't say we solved the world's problems or even any of the serious problems, but my golly, we learned a lot and became close friends in the process.
Yeah.
John was an amazing man. Somebody once said, no, he's not a human being. He's a Martian, but he does a pretty good imitation of a human being. He had a puckish sense of humor, which was often in evidence. He had a bumper sticker on his car, the Committee to Nuke the Whales, and he was a gadfly and a cynic in many ways, but also a very smart and serious guy from whom I learned a tremendous amount.
Was he your connection to the Santa Fe Institute?
No, he wasn't. Actually, maybe he was in some way, but no, I don't think I ever communicated with him about the Santa Fe Institute. And I never was at the Santa Fe Institute with John as near as I can remember. But John thought we would solve some deep theoretical problems in AI and philosophy. We didn't, but at least we outlined some.
Yeah. Well, that's important. Knowing what the questions are is so important.
That, to me, I often say that that's what philosophy is figuring out what the right questions are. We aren't so good at answers. We're pretty good at questions.
Yeah, that's critical. So did it? Well, let's talk about John Hoagland a little bit. What sort of conversations did you have with him at CASBS? Because didn't he coin the term good old-fashioned AI, GOFAI?
He's the one that coined the term good old-fashioned AI. In his book, which was published about a year after that, I think called Artificial Intelligence, the Very Idea. And John and I were dear friends, very close friends and confidants. And I had known him for a few years. He'd been a student of Bert Dreyfus's at Berkeley. And he wrote a very important paper. His fledgling PhD in philosophy, but he wrote an important paper called The Plausibility of Cognitivism, which appeared in Behavioral and Brain Sciences as a Target article way back in the first few years, maybe volume 1. And I think that's how I got to know him. Maybe I'd met him before, but he moved to Pittsburgh, and we became dear friends. And until his untimely death,
Yes.
and he helped me through some of the hardest thinking I've ever done. I had started a project the year before. I had been at All Souls College, and before that at Bristol. I'd had 2 years in a row off. Boy, what a privileged character I was. 1 year with a Fulbright at Bristol, and then a visiting fellowship at All Souls, and then the year at CASBS. And that year in England, I'd worked on a paper on a terrible tangle of philosophical issues, sometimes known to those who worked on it as the Propositional Attitude Task Force. And this was all bound up with Russell and Frege and Quine. And I had decided, along with Steve Stitch, a philosopher who was with me in Bristol, we just tried to write a paper setting that whole issue straight. And we found that we had different ways of approaching it. So we got a divorce on that co-authorship. And he wrote a book on, I can't remember the title right now, Plausibility of Cognitive Science, or a Belief in Cognitive Science, or something like that. And I wrote a paper that it took me really most of the year at CASBS to finish. The hardest intellectual work I think I've ever done. And it ended up with a paper called Beyond Belief, where I tried to sort it all out. And I remember Patricia Churchland, who was a friend and confidant of mine, when she read it, she called it Beyond Belief and Past Caring.
Well, how would you defend yourself?
She gave up on analytic philosophy before I did. So that was my attempt to put straight a very central set of issues that philosophers have been working on. And this was, presumably the A team. This was the varsity philosophers who were working on this. And Quine and Davidson and Kripke and I was working on it and finding it endlessly troubling and convoluted. And several times I almost gave up. And John would walk me up in the hills above the center and just talk to me and get me calmed down and show me that I could do it after all and encourage me. I couldn't have done it without John's help. It's not that he gave me ideas, but that he gave me confidence and gave me a new perspective on what I was doing. And I just love John for that. That was one of my great intellectual partnerships, actually.
Yeah. Well, that's a real gift, when someone inspires you to persist and persevere,
Yeah, absolutely.
But what made you part ways with analytic philosophy in the end?
Who says I have?
Well, you said that earlier, so I was just picking up on that.
Well.
Wondered what you meant.
I'm still officially an analytic philosopher, but a lot of analytic philosophers would drum me out of the core, I guess. I just think that it became a sort of Mandarin, hermetically sealed, taking in each other's laundry set of technical issues, which I couldn't convince myself were really worth spending much time on. One of my favorite quotes is from the great Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb, who once said, "If it isn't worth doing, it isn't worth doing well." And,
I like that.
yes, and I decided that the Propositional Attitude Task Force wasn't worth doing. Now, I didn't just decide that and walk away. I wrote Beyond Belief to show, I thought, why it wasn't worth doing. I couldn't leave without pronouncing my diagnosis and epitaph. And it's still going on. And about once a decade, I look in on it to see whether they've made any progress. And I swear they're talking about exactly the same issues they were talking about back in 1980. And every now and then they reinvent one of my wheels from that paper and think that's some more progress. But I, for one, am not contributing to that literature anymore.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And you've certainly found plenty of other things to think about.
I have indeed.
Yeah. I have an interesting quote from Brian Cantwell Smith's 2019 book. Do you know Brian?
No, I know him well.
Yeah. The Promise of Artificial Intelligence, Reckoning and Judgment with MIT Press. There he recounts that he attended a March 25th, 1980 lunch meeting of that working group we were just discussing. And here's what he writes about it. He says, at lunch on March 25th, 1980, at a workshop on artificial intelligence and philosophy at Stanford's Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, one of the participants suggested that we would all have been better off if Kant had written his Critique of Pure Reason in Lisp. Looking up in alarm, I locked eyes with an equally shocked participant in the person of John Hoagland. So began a fast friendship and intellectual partnership that lasted until 2010, when John tragically succumbed to a heart attack at his own Festschrift at the University of Chicago. Do you have any recollection of that lunch meeting that took place 3 days before your birthday?
Oh yes, I do. I mean, we had a workshop which involved a lot of people from Berkeley and around the country, and even from abroad. Gareth Evans, the fiery Welsh philosopher, was there, and he was a major participant in the Propositional Attitude Task Force. And that was a landmark meeting in many ways. It was also very sad because I had invited Gareth Evans to come from Oxford to come a week early so he'd learn something about AI, because he had just taken the position in Oxford, the wonderfully named position, the Wild Readership in Mental Philosophy, a professorship of sorts. And they'd offered it to me, but I couldn't afford to do it because I had a family.
Yeah.
Salary wasn't enough. I would have loved to have been the wild reader of mental philosophy. But Gareth took it. And I said, well, Gareth, you got to come out to Stanford and I'll give you a crash course in AI, which he did. And he got it, but he was not buying it. But we had this amazing workshop.
What wasn't Gareth Evans buying? That's interesting.
Yes, it's hard to do justice to in a few sentences. He was still a philosopher.
Yeah.
And not an engineer. John Hoagland and I were engineers in spirit.
In spirit, yeah.
But the tragic thing was that Gareth went back to Oxford, and I was so thrilled that he was going to be the wild reader and he'd bring AI to Oxford, but he was actually dying of cancer, and he died just a few weeks or months later. He'd been ill when he was at the Stanford session. But we had some very intense conversations there. John Hoagland, I couldn't attend the Festschrift for John in Chicago, but I knew that he was dying, actually of Alzheimer's. He told me he had early onset Alzheimer's. And I had written a piece to be delivered, and Brian Cantwell Smith delivered it to John just an hour before he collapsed and died.
Wow.
But John had the joy. I mean, I've talked to people who were there. John was hanging in there to the last moment, and he was being celebrated as the great philosopher he was. He really was. He was the real thing, a real philosopher, and I miss him.
Yeah. Who do you think made the lisp comment in that meeting?
I can't remember. I wonder if Brian remembers. He probably does. It might have been John McCarthy.
Yeah.
After all, John was really one of the creators of Lisp, probably the creator of Lisp.
Yeah, that's right. That's who it was, I bet.
Yeah.
What? Now, I'm fascinated by this point you're making about being philosophers but thinking like engineers, because you have this great attraction to science, and that's what makes your work so exciting to read, is you really know the science as well as the philosophy. And what do you think accounts for that? I would describe myself that way, but I was a math major as an undergraduate, and you were a philosophy major. So
I grew up in a humanist family. My father was a historian. My mother was an English teacher.
Yeah.
And the idea of being an engineer would never have occurred to any of us. In fact, if I'd said I'd wanted to be an engineer, I think it would have shocked my mother almost as if I'd said I'd wanted to be a masseur or a lion tamer. What? Engineers back in those days, they were often viewed as sort of second-class intellectuals. But I had been building things and making things and fixing things all my life. And if there'd been an engineer in the family or something, I think I would have been an engineer. I might not have been a very good one. But I've always loved how things work and taking things apart and putting them back together again. So did John Hoagland.
Yeah.
While he was at CASBS, now this is the dawn of word processing and the internet, and we all had DARPANET names, and we had email with DARPANET.
Really? And, in 1979.
Yeah. Absolutely, John McCarthy laid it on. We had phone modems, 300 baud phone modems in our studies, and John was fascinated with the DARPANET, but to give you an idea of how much of an engineer he was, he took an old IBM Selectric golf ball typewriter and wrote software to turn it into a printer.
That's very cool.
And it was all, if you looked under the hood, he had all these bent paper clips which were in place, which moved the golf ball. So you didn't touch the keys, you just sat there and the Selectric ball went whippity, whippity, whippity. So he did that. He also made a program that made beautiful mazes with a sort of random seed that were very tricky. I mean, the guy, he really knew computers.
He was self-taught entirely, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
And were you as well, or were you?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. I'd never taken a course in computer science, but I learned a lot from various people in the field.
Well, what was the path that led you to philosophy as a major?
Well, when I was an undergraduate, when I was a freshman, I had a wonderful philosophy teacher. That was it. I had two wonderful philosophy teachers. One at Wesleyan. One was a historian of philosophy named Louis Mink, and with him I read Descartes' Meditations and thought, this is fantastic, but I think it's wrong. I think I'll spend an afternoon, see if I can figure out how to refute it. 60 years later, I'm still working on it. And then there was a young logician there. I took a math course from him. And he was under the mistaken impression that I was a math prodigy because I'd had 2 years of calculus at Exeter. I wasn't a math prodigy. I'd just been well taught. And but I took mathematical logic course from Henry Keiberg, which was certainly the strangest and most daunting introduction to logic any undergraduates ever had. But that's where I discovered Quine late one night in the math library, reading Quine's book From a Logical Point of View, which was actually in words, not just in formulae. Yeah. And I spent all night reading the book and decided in the morning I'd transfer to Harvard because I had to do battle with this Quine guy. He was pretty amazing. I thought he was wrong, but I wanted to go there and study with him, which I did. I transferred to Harvard to work with Quine, work against Quine, really.
Yeah.
Then when I got to graduate school, I discovered I was the village Quinean. I accepted so much more of Quine than any of them did.
But it's interesting that you could read it and like it, but still see things that you thought were wrong with it. Usually it takes undergraduates a bit of time to disagree with something that's very well constructed, you know?
Well, yeah, I guess that's right. But I always tell my students, I love it when a student comes to me just on fire. They've got a refutation of Kant or Hume or Descartes or somebody, and I say, yeah, great. Here's what you do. You write it up. Now you may discover, as you're writing it, that you've somehow underestimated your quarry or misunderstood your quarry, and that your refutation isn't quite as solid as you thought it was. Don't worry. Finish the draft, then go back and write a new first paragraph, which says, some folks might think that the following was a refutation of Kant or Hume or whatever. Here's the argument, but they're wrong. I said, and that's a real contribution. That's a real contribution if you can do that.
That's an extension, right?
It's your safety net.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so that's been a favorite gimmick of mine over the years. I call it a gimmick, but it's a pretty deep approach. Yes. Basically, I tell students, if you think you've got a refutation of some famous philosopher, the chances are like about 99 to 1 that you're wrong. They're great for a reason. But go ahead. See what you can make of it. But just remember, these folks, we're probably not idiots to put these idiots on the syllabus.
It sounds like you're a great teacher. I'm curious, what led you to Tufts? I know you were at UC Irvine.
I was at Irvine for 6 years and loved it. But we wanted to come east because we were from the east and we bought a farm in Maine and wanted to get back closer to Maine. Doing a 3,000-mile commute every summer did not strike me as a good idea.
Yeah.
And Tufts had the best invitation. Those were still sort of a seller's market in the philosophy world. I actually had three offers with tenure, so I was able to choose Tufts, and it was the perfect place for me.
What made it perfect?
A couple of years later, I was a visiting professor at Harvard for the year, where I'd been an undergraduate. Mm-hmm. And when I'd been an undergraduate, I resented the fact that some of my professors were very good at hiding. And I thought, shame on them. When I was a visiting professor, I discovered you have to be very good at hiding because Harvard students will eat you alive. They think they're entitled to world-class people at the top of their form every day, all day. And if you don't find some way to hide, they will drive you into the ground. And 1 year of that was a fabulous year in many ways, but it was enough for me. I could go back to Tufts, and I didn't have to supervise dissertations. And the best of the tough students were as good as the best of the Harvard students. But they weren't as sure of themselves. And they weren't as spoiled. They didn't think that they had a right to 12 hours a week of your personal time. and I could give them all they could handle with a fraction of the preparation that I had to reserve for Harvard students.
That's so interesting, because I teach at Middlebury, and and I've taught at Harvard, and I compare the two experiences this way: that if you have a guest celebrity academic coming in from outside at Harvard, and there's a dinner afterwards, the Harvard students will knock each other over to be able to sit next to that person at the dinner. When it comes to Middlebury students, they'll all be politely hanging back because they're convinced someone else deserves the spot next to the speaker.
Yeah, that rings true.
And it's nice, though. It's nice for the reasons you suggest.
I could never have written the books I've written if I had been a Harvard professor, because I would have been swallowed up. Harvard works their professors very hard. And I guess being a big fish in a little pond was good for me.
Yeah, you certainly done well. I mean, did you find it helpful to test drive some of your ideas on the undergraduates, because you're such a lucid writer?
Every one of them. This was an absolute. I discovered early on that here's how Dan writes a book. When I've got a penultimate draft, I teach a seminar on the book, on the penultimate draft. And the students are there to keep me honest, to say what they don't understand. We go through it chapter by chapter. They all get thanked in the foreword, in the preface. They all get thanked in the preface, and they get an autographed free copy. And otherwise, their parents pay. It's the old Tom Sawyer whitewash fence trick. They pay big bucks to fix my books.
That's great. Sam Huntington used to do that too. He used to say that if you want to write books for a more general audience, teach undergraduates, because they'll tell you when you're not making sense. He says graduate students are too subservient. They want to please.
Oh, absolutely right. That's been a theme of mine for years, that if you can't explain what you're doing to a bright undergraduate, you don't understand what you're doing. And in many fields, especially in philosophy, where you're just talking to graduate students and colleagues, you get these little internecine, hermetically sealed battles that aren't worth anything. They're not productive, and nobody else can understand them, and the participants may even take a certain amount of pride in that. But, it's just...
Well, your books appeal to so many different disciplines, too, I think, from that approach, too, from being at a liberal arts university.
Well, I've often admitted this. I said, if Consciousness Explained, which was my sort of first trade book, aside from The Mind's Eye, which I did with Doug Hofstadter, if that had been a runaway bestseller, and a Pulitzer Prize winner, but it hadn't been taken seriously by the people in the relevant cognitive sciences, it would have been a failure. What I had discovered was a really deep systemic fact about interdisciplinary research. When experts talk to experts, they always err on the side of under-explaining.
Yeah.
Because to over-explain is to insult. And there's no cure for that except get a bunch of bright undergraduates and have two experts come and teach them. Well, one expert teaches while the other one overhears, eavesdrops. Then the other expert teaches while the other one eavesdrops. Nobody worries about over-explaining, because they're explaining, the undergraduates are the target audience. And in fact, if you do it that way, everybody wins, because that's actually the right level for the experts too.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's a great way of describing it. Yeah, you've been described by Stephen Jay Gould as a Darwinian fundamentalist.
Yes,
What is he
Yes.
misunderstanding when he calls you that, or would you proudly accept the label?
In a way, I would, but Steve got off in a world of his own. I think, actually, I've just been writing about this. I think he may have been done in by his early successful battle with cancer. There were a few years when he was widely reputed to be dying of cancer, and nobody wanted to criticize him. And after those, he went into full remission. But after that, he'd become used to not being above criticism. Yeah. And he was saying all sorts of things that just weren't true. And he was indulging some of his ideological brickbats and hobby horses in ways that were really, I think, unconscionable. He was misrepresenting opposing views, mine, but not just mine. Also, a lot of evolutionary biology he was misrepresenting, and ecology, and sociobiology, and he had a political agenda which he could not distinguish from his scientific agenda. And although he was famed as the evolutionist laureate of America, he was actually selling America a false bill of goods. And a lot of people knew it, but he was so powerful and so vindictive and so vicious in his attacks that nobody wanted to bell the cat until I came along, and I just thought, I'm going to do this. Somebody's got to do this. So while the evolutionary theorist says, "We'll hold your coat, Dan," I went after him. Well, I have a whole story about that in my memoirs. I'm not going to tell it all to you here. Let's just say that he went ballistic after my book appeared.
Yeah.
And but not at first. For a couple of years, he just, when anybody asked him about it, he just said it was beneath discussion. It was just trash.
Really?
But oh yeah. Then Maynard Smith, the dean of evolutionary theorists, John Maynard Smith in England, wrote a glowing review in the New York Review of Books, which was Steve's periodical. That's where he wrote his reviews. And Steve was so hurt by that review that he launched his two-part diatribe on Darwinian fundamentalism. He didn't dare really take on Maynard Smith. Maynard Smith was a hero to everybody. But he sure took after me, and he took after Steve Pinker and a few others. But, you know, I'm a philosopher. I don't have NIH funding or NSF funding. He couldn't hurt me. So it was okay. I could weather the storm. And in fact, in the wake of that, I was invited to give named lectures at a number of the top evolutionary biology programs in the country. Their way of saying, thanks, Dan.
What do you think his most egregious misrepresentation was, if you had to pick one thing that he misrepresented?
His punctuated equilibrium was a misrepresentation because everybody from Darwin on realized that evolution could go fast or go slow. Most of the time it goes slow. But there are these punctuations, as people have recognized for years. So that was a tempest in a teapot. His attack on adaptationism in the famous or infamous Spandrels paper with Dick Lewontin, that was a huge misrepresentation of adaptationism. And I had criticized him at length in behavioral and brain sciences about that. So those were both misrepresentations, and he misrepresented the Cambrian explosion in Wonderful Life. And although I never went into this, there were a lot of people who wanted me to go after him for the mismeasure of man, which destroyed the reputation of Bert. Turned out that Bert wasn't the guy who fudged the skull measurements, it was Gould.
Oh dear.
This came out in Science a few years later. Gould never made any changes. So, no, it's a sad story.
Yeah, that is sad. On a more happy note, your book is great.
Thank you.
This latest one. It's such a distillation of so many different tributaries of thought.
Well, for me, certainly that's what it was. It was trying to put it all together.
Would you consider it a good distillation of your thought? Is that how you would situate it among your many contributions?
Yeah, I think it ties off a lot of the loose ends pretty well, and defends against some misrepresentations. And I'm still working on consciousness. Have some more ideas, more things to say about that.
I look forward to hearing them. And I just want to ask you a little bit, and for our listeners, I thought we'd just whet their appetite for this book a bit, because in the book, you write that you like the concept of manifest image and scientific image to migrate to fields other than philosophy. I found that very useful.
These are terms from one of my heroes, philosopher Wilfrid Sellars. The manifest image is the world we live in. It's the world of colors and haircuts and dollar bills and rainbows and so forth. The scientific image is the world of photons and quarks, atoms and molecules, and in which there really isn't any color. There's wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation, but atoms aren't colored, molecules aren't colored. So what evolution has done is simplified the behavioral world of organisms by giving them the manifest image, which is a sort of metaphorical, stripped down, the physical world for dummies way of getting through the day. And only the things that matter to the particular organism are highlighted. The pigeon can peck crumbs of food off a piece of newspaper, but it can't read the newspaper. It doesn't need to read the newspaper. That's just background noise to that. And human speech is background noise to every creature but us. What the manifest image consists of is what the late great psychologist Jimmy Gibson called affordances. They're the things that afford you doing things, like chairs afford sitting, windows afford looking out of or jumping out of, holes afford putting things in them, doors afford opening and closing and walking in and out of. A knife affords cutting, and so forth. A hardware store is a museum of affordances. And so's a furniture store. So's sort of everything in the concrete world that we inhabit. When I pick up my glass, it affords drinking. I don't have to think about it. I have a sense of its heft. I know it's got a back and a front. I know that it won't leak out the bottom. I know how far to tip it. All of these things are, as Heidegger would say, ready to hand. And that's the world that we live in. And it is a sort of user illusion. It is like the user illusion of your cell phone. You don't want to know the dozens of layers of complexity of software that go into your cell phone. Heavens no. You want to click and drag and squeeze with your fingers. All those, that's a beautifully engineered, designed user illusion that makes you an adept but basically clueless user of the cell phone. You don't know what's going on under the hood.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true of your mind. Your mind is your user illusion of the brain. Your mind, the evolution has given you a stripped down digest and metaphorical way of rendering all the things that matter to you in a form that's easy for you to handle without too much exercise.
But my brain is stuck on something. My brain is stuck on where machine learning fits into all this, because would that represent the quintessential scientific image?
Well, no, that's very nice. That's a good question. It's in between. Some people would say that deep learning is neither manifest image nor scientific image. It's engineering, and that's all it is. I once wrote a paper called Cognitive Wheels. Wheels are wonderful, but you don't find any in nature. Well, that's not true. It turns out there are some molecular level wheels, little rotors in the flagella of bacteria, for instance. Some amazing little ratchets and wheels when you get down at the molecular level. But there aren't any animals with landing gear. No four-wheeled iguanas. So deep learning is a stunning application of big data and fundamentally sort of Darwin-esque methods. But what we get from them are sort of wonder fabrics. They're amazing systems that can find needles in haystacks and find patterns that are otherwise all but invisible. But nobody knows how to build them into a an intelligent agent yet.
When I think about machine learning and I think about your description of our consciousness not being something that we can understand by looking under the hood. With machine learning, you've got a similar sort of black box. So is this a move? Is this science, or is it something else?
Aha! Yes, indeed. Good question. Yes, it's science. It's a new kind of science.
Yeah.
It's a kind of science which may be very disturbing, because we may be seeing the end of the age of deep comprehension, where we may give up comprehending some things and just get tools that can solve the problems without our comprehending them, which is, to a person like me, deeply unsettling. I want to understand, but some people just want to control, and they may be able to control without really having deep understanding.
Maybe you can help me understand. Do you think that machine learning is in a way an obliteration of the very idea of an Archimedean point? As your favorite Descartes would have understood it, or Aristotle, or
it isn't, but that point's got to be demolished anyway. My way of saying it is, there's no homunculus at the center of you. There's no Cartesian theater. There's no place where it all comes together. All of that is accomplished by a distributed, in space and time, network of lesser agencies that manage to hold you together and give you the benign illusion that you are in charge. And in fact, you are. But you isn't a thing that's distinct from your body. You is the way your body controls itself.
That's a very fundamental insight, and some of the recent findings in cognitive science would very much back up your understanding of consciousness. But the thing I'm really curious about is this isn't something you've written about, but I wonder where mental illness figures into this notion of consciousness. I mean, what is that? Just another manifest image as opposed to a real image? When someone's psychotic, are they? What do you think? I mean,
well, some years ago, Nick Humphrey and I spent a year investigating multiple personality disorder. We wrote a long essay on that was destined for the New York Review of Books, but then the New York Review of Books refused to publish it for mysterious reasons. We published it elsewhere, but it's in my collection of Brain Children. It's called Speaking for Ourselves, which was also the title of a briefly published newsletter for and by multiple personality disorder sufferers. Speaking for ourselves. They do speak for themselves. And the thing is that multiple personality disorder is a real disorder, or dissociative identity disorder it's called now. The question of the extent to which it's iatrogenic, caused by the doctor, is still an open question, and we're not sure. But there are certainly some quite robust cases of multiple personality disorder where there's 2 or 3 selves inhabiting a single body, or even more. But they have a somewhat different manifest image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get back to your book, though, because I like this very much, and I thought we could share it with the people listening. Where you distill what I might call the essence of Darwin as, in order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. Could you just elucidate that concept? And I'm interested in the Turing concept too.
Yeah, that's a quote from one of my favorite critics of Darwin, a man named Beverly, who, in high dudgeon, wrote about Darwin's strange inversion of reasoning, and that's it. That's right. You don't have to understand. Knowledge comes later. Comprehension comes later. In the beginning, there is mindless, purposeless natural selection, and it can actually design beautiful machines by the Darwinian process. It's slow, but it can speed up along the way. It evolves just the way human artificers have made tools and then use those tools to make better tools and use those tools to make better tools. So evolution has improved its game over the billions of years, adding new steps which enhance the capacity of natural selection to explore regions of design space and come up with yet further intricate designs. It's to me the most wonderful idea of all ideas, and it's true. It works. We know it's true, and it turns everything on its head.
And then you have Turing's contribution. In order to be a perfect and beautiful computing machine,
you don't have to have to understand arithmetic. Yeah, I mean, and then there's Hume's strange inversion of reasoning too. He sees that the secondary quality, so-called the qualia that philosophers love to talk about, these, or let's take his idea of causation. It's not that causation is something we see with our eyes. It's not perceivable. It's something that our mind, in effect, projects. He says the mind spreads itself on external things, and that's the manifest image. We've had these revolutions: the Copernican revolution, the Einsteinian revolution, the Darwinian revolution, and now we got one more, which might be called the Humean revolution, or the AI revolution. It's coming to see that meaning and mind is not the original source. In the beginning was the word. No, words are very recent. They've only been around for a few 100,000 years. In the beginning was evolution. And understanding, comprehension, explanation, and design, intelligent design, is a very, very recent phenomenon. And it's not always that intelligent.
Well, you tell us that, and I think quite rightly, that both Darwin and Turing have discovered something truly unsettling to a human mind: competence without comprehension.
That's right, yes. This is an idea that its time has come. I think people are more and more seeing how true this is. Let's start with a simple example. A bacterium may competently move the right direction in order to obtain nutrients or to escape from a toxic element. It doesn't know why it's doing that. It doesn't have to know why. It's just endowed. It is gifted with a little bit of competence that it doesn't have to comprehend. A butterfly has spots on its wings that look like eyes, and it can scare off a bird by flapping its wings, and the bird may think this is a predator in the branch, not an edible butterfly. The butterfly is clueless about that. Mm-hmm. Everywhere we look in nature, everywhere, and in ourselves, from the motor proteins in our cells on up, everywhere we look, we see these brilliant adaptive solutions to problems and reactions to things by things that don't understand what they're doing. And the nerves that send the signals from your retina to your visual cortex, they don't know what the heck they're doing, but they're tremendously competent. They send messages which are coded and decoded by decoders that themselves don't have to understand what they're doing. So in the end, we can see that understanding is not the beginning. It's the end. It's a very, very recent phenomenon. And we have an understanding that no other creature on the planet has. Not the dolphins, not the elephants, not the dogs, not the wolves, not the chimpanzees. Our kind of understanding is not the beginning. It's the very most recent chapter. And if we don't use it better, it'll be the last chapter.
Well, that's... I just wonder if what follows logically from that is that today's evolutionary biologists and computer scientists have competence without comprehension, and maybe the same applies to you and me.
In many ways it does, but we shouldn't get too frazzled about that. There's lots of good reasons for things that you do every day that you've never thought of. You don't have to. Mm-hmm. Maybe you do them because other people do them. It's just habit. But if you were to stop and get persnickety and recalcitrant and do things a different way, you'd soon discover, no, it was better to do it the way everybody was doing it. They don't have to understand the reasons for this. They just do it. Those are reasons that are endorsed by cultural natural selection, not by genetic natural selection.
You know, we haven't talked about memes at all, which you refer to as informational viruses that govern infectious habits. You see that? Yeah, you see that on page 173, and words are the best examples of memes, you say further on 207.
Absolutely, yes.
And you also point out that we're willing to die for meme complexes, that is, memes made of memes. Examples like freedom, democracy, and truth.
Yes, and any number of religious memes that have inspired people to go to their deaths and sometimes take a lot of other people with them.
Yes.
Memes. So memes, I think the great insight in Dawkins' concept of a meme is that it has its own fitness. I mean, a lot of people want to write about cultural evolution and about cultural items as being adaptations passed on by cultural, not genetic means. Just like a hammer or an axe is like strong biceps. It's passed on not genetically, but culturally, but it gives the owner a clear advantage, an adaptation. But you have to understand that memes, some of them are that way. Some of them are very helpful. Some of them we couldn't live without. But some memes are absolutely parasitic and suicidal to us. I mean, they render us suicidal.
What meme? Give an example of that kind of meme.
Well, the meme of suicide. Every now and then there'll be these rashes of suicides where the idea catches on. Or how about school shootings? Or name your terrorist atrocity.
Right.
These aren't good memes. Or spray painting graffiti.
You describe memes as transmitters of culture, and I just wonder where power fits into this mimetic world, which can upend and refashion cultures, as we see happening today with our own culture.
Well, power is gained and lost by the acquisition of memes. You can't count. There are plenty of deleterious memes out there. And I mean, I think that's becoming more and more obvious. There are people out there whose minds have been crippled by the memes that they have adopted.
So with that view, would ideology be a meme?
Well, different ideologies are memes, yes. I mean, a meme, the best way to think of it is it's like a gene, except it's not expressed. Its vehicle is not DNA. It is some cultural vehicle, like a sound or a picture or a word. Or one of my favorite examples is a wagon with spoked wheels. It not only carries grain from town to town, it carries the idea of a wagon with spoked wheels from town to town. And that's how it gets there. That's how wagons spread. It's a good idea. And spray painting graffiti is probably a bad idea, all things considered, but it spreads the same way. People see it and they adopt it. And sometimes we adopt them without even wanting to adopt them. Like new pronunciations of words. We don't even notice it. Or we see the extinction of a meaning of a word and its replacement with another. Beg the question is gone. Farewell. It doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Yeah.
Incredible doesn't mean what it used to mean.
That's true.
When somebody says, "Oh, Dan, that was an incredible lecture," and I say, "Gee, I'm sorry, I really wanted you to believe it."
That's true. Or something sick, and that's good. Yeah, there's a bunch of those things.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Much has been made in the media about your fierce atheism. And I have always wondered, why are you an atheist rather than an agnostic? How can you be so sure there is no God?
Oh, I think it's plain obvious. I mean, unless you have a concept of God that's so watered down that...
Right.
Yeah. One time I was debating a right-wing religious radio host, and he said, "You mean you don't believe in a eternal, all-powerful force that makes the world possible?" I said, "Oh, I do. He says, "You do?" I said, "Yeah, I call it gravity."
I thought you were going to say love.
No, gravity. It's more powerful than love.
Yeah? But, you can't prove that that's so. So why wouldn't you just suspend disbelief? This is like a Kierkegaardian attack on your
Look, I don't
position.
think it's worth arguing about. I think it's so obvious that religions, they are the fables and musings of often illiterate, uneducated people trying to make the most of the world they live in, and they come up with these ideas. It's the most natural thing in the world. I have a whole section in Breaking the Spell about how I think God, the idea of God evolved. And I think it evolved from the idea of lesser gods, that is to say, leprechauns, fairies, gremlins, all the other little invisible creatures of the world, the talking trees and so forth. And I think that what happened is that they're all triggered by the hyperactive agent detective device, as one writer puts it. When we're, in a perhaps anxiety-provoking situation out in the dark and we hear a rustling noise, who goes there? Not what's happening, who? Our first, and this makes evolutionary sense. If there's an agent out there, I want to know. Because he may want me. What do you want? And when the snow falls off your eaves and lands with a thud outside the window, your dog jumps up and growls. Who goes there? Who goes there? But he goes back to sleep. But a human being, it's going to spin around in their head because they got language and they got thinking, oh, maybe there's an abominable snowman out there. And pretty soon they're off to the races. And it feeds on itself. So pretty soon every community has these a local menagerie of invisible creatures that everybody believes in because it's so cool to believe in them and so hard to disprove them. Those are the wild memes. Then they get domesticated by priests and kings and harnessed to improve the power of priests and kings and others. And it seems to me that the story of the growth of religious doctrine is just transparent. I devoted, as one outraged critic said, less than 6 pages of Breaking the Spell to arguments for or against the existence of God. And the main reason for that was that when I asked people who were deeply religious, they said that wasn't the important thing. And I believed them.
What was the important thing?
Community. Love. Helping. I've always liked the line from Robert Frost's poem. Home is where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in. That's what religions do for many people.
Right. But you believe in those things too.
I believe in those things. And I don't know if there is a secular substitute that will do that thing as well as religions do. But I don't want my religions to be doctrinal at all. I think all the irrationality, I think anything that valorizes irrationality is dangerous.
The clerics are dangerous. Not necessarily the religion.
Not just the clerics, but the churchgoers who valorize irrationality.
Yeah, I like that definition. That's good. Let me ask you. I'm taking up a lot of your time, and I'm grateful to you for it. I wanted to ask you about your view on artificial intelligence, where you say the real danger, I think, is not that machines more intelligent than we are will usurp our role as captains of our destinies, but that we will overestimate comprehension of our latest thinking tools, prematurely ceding authority to them far beyond their competence. That's on page 402, and I think it's great. Can you?
Yeah, I think that's the real danger. I think people who worry about superintelligences and the singularity, I think that's a distraction and a potentially dangerous distraction from the real problems, which are much closer to hand. We already have AI systems which can do a lot of harm by being granted too much authority. And it's a very tricky thing. Let's take medicine for a moment. There are now diagnostic systems in medicine. And Watson is geared up to become a virtuoso diagnostic system that can probably outdo any human diagnosticians. Well, now, what's the doctor going to do? I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I want a doctor who has the chutzpah to say, I trust my own judgment over that of this machine. It is their own sense of responsibility that will lead them to cede authority, in some cases, to the machines. And that will be dangerous because it might be a runaway phenomenon. If we start ceding authority to our machines, then we'll have less authority to cede. And the next crop of medical students will not be anywhere near as good diagnosticians as the previous generation, because they didn't have to be. And pretty soon, what you've got is medical people who are basically valued for their bedside manner. They're glorified doormen at the apartment building, pushing buttons and wishing you good day and cheering you up. If that's what the life of the doctor becomes in a few years, who will want to be doctors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to be mindful of that. For researchers of human consciousness today, what are the big unanswered questions? And are they being asked?
Oh, yes. They're being asked by some of us.
What are they?
Well, what I've been saying for 30 years is that there's no Cartesian theater, there's no homunculus in the center. But what's there to replace it? And what I've said is that all the work and play done by the homunculus has to be broken up and distributed among lots of lesser agencies. Cell assemblies that are not themselves conscious, but that can do some of the appreciating, some of the understanding, can do this. Now, how do you get close to 1 trillion cells to organize itself into a team that can do that? Yes, the brain is a computer, but it's not a digital computer. It's not a von Neumann machine. And quite frankly, nobody knows what the operating system of such a computer should be. In fact, in a certain sense, it doesn't have an operating system. It couldn't. It's got to be controlled by a coalition of competitive, collaborative agents, sub-agents, that don't even know who you are. But how that's done, that's, one of my favorite lines about philosophy, but not just philosophy, is that one of the great foibles is mistaking a failure of imagination for an insight into necessity. I don't know how to imagine answers to this question. I'm working on it. I'm working on it every day. I have clues. I have glimmers. And there are people today, the Paris group, Stan DeHaan and his colleagues, the Global Workspace group, the Bayesian networks groups, the predictive processing groups. I think they've got parts of the answers. Trying to put it all together into something that isn't just hand-waving is the next step. And we're getting closer. It's very exciting.
Are you familiar at all with Jeffrey West's book on scale?
Oh, yes. I know Jeffrey, and I've read his book. It's a brilliant book. Yeah, that's one of those great Santa Fe ideas.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a complexity idea.
Yeah. No, I think Jeffrey's work is on my list of things. I've got a bunch of authors whose work I'm trying to incorporate into my own thinking, and he's one.
What would you like to be remembered for most?
It's
a hard question, but I can't resist asking it. You've had such an illustrious career. So many contributions. What are you most proud of?
I guess for helping to solve the problem of consciousness.
That's a small thing.
With an evolutionary, by bringing evolution, I just keep discovering more ways in which Darwin's idea is the best idea anybody ever had. And it's funny how many people hate that message.
Yeah.
I mean, people who aren't religious, but they still hate it. They're really unsettling to many people.
Yeah. It's just, it seems like cognitive science is increasingly backing you up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is fascinating.
Oh yeah. I'm getting to say I told you so in some way.
We'll enjoy that. That's a good feeling.
Well, yeah, but it's mean. It's an ignoble sentiment. So I try to bite my tongue.
It's an exciting time. Let's just call it that.
Let's call it that. Yeah, after all, I've been working on that since 1965. So
You deserve a little feeling of satisfaction, I think. Final question. 3 books that you would consider your desert island books, or three books that you've recently read that you would recommend to other people.
Well, Daniel Doerr's book, The Instruction of Imagination, and Jeffrey West's book Scale is I'd put that right up there. And well, if they haven't read it, they should read The Origin of the Species. It's beautifully written.
Yes.
It's a page turner. It's wonderful, and you get to know the man in his humility and his enthusiasm and his, in some ways, innocence. Oh, can I add a 4th book?
Yes, you're allowed.
Richard Dawkins some years ago put together a wonderful volume that very few people have read. It's called The Ancestor's Tale. And it starts at us. And it works back through the tree of life, going from human beings to chimps and bonobos, and it goes back all the way to the beginning of life, down our particular paths. Of course, it's based sort of on Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in a way. And it is full of wisdom and brilliant sketches of amazing life forms. It will enrich your sense of the planet. It's Richard Attenborough in a book. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for a really stimulating, wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with you. And
we didn't talk very much about CASBS.
Should we talk some more about CASBS? Please tell us about Lake Lagunita, your distress about Lake Lagunita.
I'd been at the center for several months, and there was this sort of ugly brown patch of ground down on the Stanford campus down below my hilltop window. And one weekend or something, one Monday I came in, it was filled with water. Winter rains had come, and not only was it filled with water, but there were Stanford students out there swimming and windsurfing. This was the beginning of the windsurfing age. And I couldn't take my eyes off them. And I'm a sailor from way back. And I went down the hill on my bicycle and got over there and found out, hey, I could rent a windsurfer. I had a Stanford faculty pass because I was at CASBS. And I was going to come back the next day. So I told John McCarthy, I said, tomorrow I'm bringing a swimsuit and I'm going to go down and learn how to do that. And he said, do you mind if I come along? And I said, no, come along. And he sat there on a bench on the shore while I fell and fell and fell and fell and fell and fell and fell for probably an hour and a half.
Oh my God.
And then I paddled back in. And John said, well, I guess you got that out of your system. I said, oh no, I'm going to be back tomorrow. And I did. And the very next time I went, I got it and became a competent and even somewhat comprehending windsurfer. So windsurfing was one of the memes that I was infected by at CASBS, and it led to hundreds and hundreds of hours of joy.
Thanks to Daniel Dennett and Allison Stanger for a great conversation. And if more great conversation is what you're after, head over to our website at casbs.stanford.edu, or you can find us on Twitter, we're at CASBS Stanford. As always, we've got links in the episode notes for those of you following us in your podcast app of choice, and for those of you who don't, there's a whole world of interesting topics we explore, sometimes one-on-one with individual fellows, and sometimes engaging panel discussions with diverse voices. So fire up that podcast app on your phone, search for Human Centered, and give us a follow. You'll be glad you did. Until next time, from everyone at CASBS and the Human Centered team, thanks for listening.